The morning sun touched the windows of the small music school, filling the hallways with soft golden light. Students hurried through the corridors, laughing, chatting, and carrying their instruments. Among them walked a quiet girl, clutching her old violin case close to her chest. Her steps were slow, careful, almost invisible in the noisy crowd. She was new here, and no one really noticed her yet. She had joined the school only 2 weeks ago, transferring from a small town where she had spent most of her life. Music was the only thing that ever made her feel alive. But here, in this new place filled with confident, talented students, she felt like an outsider. Everyone seemed to already know each other, forming groups that laughed loudly and practiced together after class. She, on the other hand, sat alone during lunch, quietly eating her sandwich and reading sheet music. In the same classroom, there was a boy who loved attention. He had a natural charm and a way of making everyone laugh. He was talented too, but he knew it and never missed a chance to show off. When the teacher asked for volunteers to play something short, he would jump up first, grinning widely as the class clapped for him. He enjoyed being the center of attention, and the more people watched, the louder his confidence grew. One afternoon, during a group practice session, the girl took her violin out of its case and began to play softly. Her notes were calm and full of emotion, not meant for anyone else, just for herself. But the sound caught the attention of the loud boy. He smirked and nudged his friend sitting next to him. "Listen to that," he whispered. "It sounds like someone crying." A few students laughed quietly. The girl froze for a second but continued to play, pretending not to hear. The boy stood up, walked toward her, and said loudly, "Hey, are you trying to make us all fall asleep before the show even starts?" Everyone in the room laughed. Even the teacher gave a small, awkward smile, unsure how to respond. The girl stopped playing. Her cheeks turned pink and she lowered her eyes. She didn't say anything. She just nodded slightly and put her violin back in its case. The laughter faded after a moment, but the damage was done. Later that day, she sat alone on a bench outside, watching the others leave. The wind blew gently, carrying faint echoes of laughter from the music room. She sighed and closed her eyes. Her heart felt heavy, but she told herself it didn't matter. She had faced worse before. People laughed because they didn't understand. That was what her mother always told her. The next day, she came early to school. The hallways were empty and quiet. She found an old piano in the corner of the auditorium, its keys slightly chipped and dusty. She sat down and pressed a few notes, feeling the warmth of the sound fill the empty room. Slowly, she began to play a tune she had written herself, a soft melody that reminded her of home, of rain, of quiet nights when she used to practice under the dim light of her bedroom lamp. She didn't notice that the teacher had entered the hall and was listening from the doorway. There was something about her playing that felt honest, something deeper than skill. It was emotion. It was heart. When the teacher clapped softly at the end, she turned around, surprised and embarrassed. "That was beautiful," the teacher said with a gentle smile. "Why don't you sign up for the school showcase next month?" Her eyes widened. She had never performed in front of a big audience before. The thought made her nervous. "I don't know if I'm good enough," she murmured. "You are," the teacher replied firmly. "Music isn't about showing off. It's about feeling something and letting others feel it too. I think you have that." That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the teacher's words. Maybe this was her chance to prove herself. Not to the boy who mocked her, not to the class, but to herself. She decided she would do it. She would sign up. The next morning, a list of participants was pinned to the classroom wall. The title at the top read, "Annual Music Showcase Participants." Students crowded around to check if their names were on it. The loud boy stood near the front, laughing with his friends about what songs they would play. Then he noticed a quiet hand reaching toward the paper. It was her. She wrote her name at the bottom of the list and quietly walked away. The boy read it out loud, his eyebrows lifting. "She's performing?" he said, half surprised, half amused. His friends burst into laughter. "What's she going to play?" one of them joked. "The world's slowest lullaby?" The boy smirked. "Maybe she thinks this is her big moment. Let's just hope the audience doesn't fall asleep before she's done." They laughed again and walked off, not noticing that the teacher standing nearby had heard every word. The teacher didn't say anything, just looked after the girl who had quietly disappeared down the hallway. That week, she practiced every day after classes. The school was nearly empty when she sat at the piano, her violin by her side, going over the same piece again and again. Her fingers hurt, her back ached, but she kept going. She wasn't doing it for applause. She was doing it because music made her feel strong, even when people tried to make her feel small. Sometimes she imagined what it would feel like to stand on that stage. Lights shining down, the audience watching in silence. The thought scared her, but it also filled her with determination. She wanted her music to speak where words failed. One afternoon while she was playing, she didn't notice someone standing outside the door. It was the same boy who had mocked her earlier. He had stayed behind after his group practice, and when he heard the faint sound of piano coming from the hall, curiosity pulled him closer. He peeked through the window of the door and saw her playing, eyes closed, lost in the music. For a brief moment, he didn't laugh. He just listened. The melody sounded peaceful, sad but beautiful. He didn't understand why, but something about it made him quiet. Then his friend called his name from down the corridor, and the moment passed. He shook his head, smirked again, and walked away, pretending it hadn't meant anything. Days turned into weeks. Posters for the music showcase appeared around the school. Excitement filled the air. Students talked about costumes, lighting, and group rehearsals. The Loud Boys group planned a big, colorful performance filled with fast beats and dance moves. Everyone expected them to be the highlight of the night. The quiet girl, meanwhile, kept to herself. No one knew what she was preparing. Some said she would play something classical. Others thought she might sing, but she told no one. She simply practiced every single day in that same corner of the hall. Sometimes she caught other students whispering when she walked by. She heard bits of their conversations, little laughs, careless jokes, but she kept her head high. Deep inside, she knew something they didn't, that silence could be more powerful than noise. One evening, as the sun set and the room grew dim, she finished her final practice and closed her violin case. She stood by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. She smiled softly to herself. No matter what happened at the showcase, she knew she would walk onto that stage and play with all her heart. That was enough. What she didn't know was that the same boy who had laughed at her would soon be sitting in the audience, silent for the first time in his life, as her music filled the entire room. The days passed quickly, and soon the music showcase was just a week away. The entire school was buzzing with excitement. Posters hung on the walls, showing the names of all the performers. Teachers discussed stage arrangements and lighting setups, while students practiced in every corner of the building. You could hear music coming from every room, drums, guitars, violins, and voices blending together into a lively chaos. In the middle of all this noise, the quiet girl continued her own preparation. She didn't have a team, no group of friends to practice with, no fancy costume ideas, just her and her violin. Every day after classes ended, she stayed behind in the empty hall, repeating her piece over and over. She wanted every note to speak from her heart. She didn't want perfection. She wanted truth. While she practiced alone, the Loud Boy and his group were rehearsing on the main stage. Their performance was big and flashy. Fast beats, synchronized steps, bright colors. They had chosen a modern mashup with loud drums and electric sounds. Every rehearsal was like a small concert. People often gathered to watch them, clapping and cheering as they danced and played. The boy loved the attention. He laughed, cracked jokes, and gave everyone high fives when they finished. But whenever he saw the quiet girl walk by with her violin case, something inside him shifted. He didn't understand it, but there was a strange calm in her presence, like she belonged to a different world. He wanted to mock her again, to keep his image as the confident one, but lately the words didn't come out so easily. Still, when his friends made jokes about her, he joined in with a laugh, pretending he didn't care. One afternoon, as he and his group finished practicing, they found the girl sitting on the edge of the stage, quietly tuning her violin. The hall was almost empty. The boy, feeling playful, decided to tease her again. "Hey," he called out, pretending to be friendly. "You're really performing next week?" She looked up, her eyes calm. "Yes," she said softly. "That's brave," he said with a grin. "You know it's a big crowd, right? Everyone's going to be watching." "You sure you're ready for that?" She didn't answer right away. She smiled faintly and said, "I'm not playing for them. I'm playing for the music." For a second, the boy didn't know how to respond. There was something about the way she said it, so simple yet so confident, that caught him off guard. He quickly shrugged it off and laughed. "Well, good luck then," he said. "Just don't make the audience cry too early." His friends laughed and they walked away. But for some reason, her words stayed in his mind long after he left. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying her piece in her head. Every note, every pause. Her heart raced at the thought of stepping on that stage in front of so many people. She wasn't scared of playing. She was scared of being laughed at again. But then she remembered the teacher's voice telling her, "Music isn't about showing off. It's about feeling something." That thought gave her courage. She sat up, picked up her violin, and played quietly by the window until the moonlight faded. The next morning, rehearsals began for all performers. Each participant got a few minutes on stage to test the lights and sound. The quiet girl waited patiently for her turn. She stood backstage watching others perform before her. The boys' group went first. The lights flashed, the crowd clapped, and their act filled the room with energy. He looked confident and alive, feeding on the cheers of his classmates. When their turn ended, the girl walked onto the stage with her violin. The sound technician adjusted the microphone and asked her to play a few notes. She nodded and started to play softly. The melody filled the hall, gentle, smooth, full of emotion. The few people sitting there stopped talking for a moment. It wasn't loud or fast, but it made people listen. The boy, who was still sitting near the stage with his group, felt something strange stir inside him again. It wasn't just music. It was something honest. He quickly shook his head and whispered to his friend, "She's good, but still boring." His friend laughed, and the noise broke the silence. The girl stopped playing and looked up. The boy avoided her eyes. After her short rehearsal, she quietly thanked the staff and left the stage. She didn't look upset, just calm, as if nothing could touch her anymore. The teacher, who had been watching from the corner, smiled proudly. She could see that the girl's strength wasn't in her words or her confidence, it was in her music. As the week went on, everyone talked about the upcoming event. Some students placed bets on which performance would win the crowd. Most said the Loud Boys group would steal the show. A few mentioned the quiet girl, mostly with curiosity. "I wonder what she'll play," someone said. "Maybe something old-fashioned." Another laughed. "Or maybe she'll surprise us and start singing opera." She ignored the chatter and focused only on her music. Every free moment she got, she practiced. Sometimes she even forgot to eat lunch. Her fingers were sore, but her heart was steady. She knew what her song meant to her. It was her story, her voice. Meanwhile, the boys' group kept rehearsing too. They added new moves, brighter lights, and even a short comedy bit at the start. The boy loved the energy, but a small part of him began to feel uneasy. He didn't know why. Maybe it was because every time he laughed about her behind her back, something didn't feel as funny anymore. One evening, he passed by the auditorium again and heard her playing. He stopped outside the door and listened. This time he didn't laugh or move. Her music filled the air like a story without words, a story of pain, hope, and quiet strength. The boy stood there, frozen, feeling something deep inside that he couldn't explain. When she finished, he quietly walked away before she could see him. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her song. It made him remember things he had forgotten. His first music class, the joy he used to feel before everything became about showing off. He realized that somewhere along the way he had started caring more about applause than about the music itself. The next day, as they were leaving class, his friend nudged him. "Hey, after the showcase we should mess with her again," his friend said. "You know, just for laughs." The boy paused. For a moment, the old him wanted to laugh and agree, but something inside told him not to. He forced a smile and said, "Let's just focus on our act. She's got her own thing." His friend shrugged, surprised, but didn't argue. As the day of the showcase drew closer, the excitement grew. Teachers checked sound systems, students decorated the stage, and the principal gave short speeches about how proud he was of everyone. The quiet girl stood in the corner, holding her violin and watching everything with a calm smile. The boy across the room glanced at her once but quickly looked away. That evening, the final rehearsal took place. The auditorium lights glowed softly and the air was full of nervous energy. Each performer got one last chance to prepare. When it was her turn, she stood in the middle of the stage, eyes closed, and began to play. This time, even the ones who used to laugh didn't speak. Her music filled the hall with a kind of silence that demanded respect. When she finished, there was a pause. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that happens when people don't know what to say. Then the teacher clapped softly. Others followed. Even the boy clapped quietly, almost to himself. As everyone packed up to leave, he found himself walking toward her without really knowing why. She turned and gave a small smile. "Good luck tomorrow," she said kindly. He hesitated, then replied, "Yeah, you too." For the first time, his voice didn't sound like it was hiding a joke. That night, both of them stayed up late for different reasons. She practiced one last time, letting her emotions flow through every note. He sat by his window, thinking about what the showcase really meant. Maybe, he thought, it wasn't just about winning or applause. Maybe it was about feeling something real. The next morning, the stage would be ready, the audience would fill the seats, and the lights would shine bright. Neither of them knew how much that one night would change everything. But in their hearts, something had already begun to shift. A quiet understanding born from the language of music that needed no words at all. The morning of the showcase arrived with the sound of light rain tapping on the windows. The air outside smelled fresh, and the school was unusually quiet for a Saturday. Inside, however, the auditorium was alive with movement. Students ran around fixing props, testing microphones, and checking their costumes. Teachers whispered instructions. The sound crew adjusted lights, and nervous laughter filled the hallways. Backstage, the quiet girl sat in a corner with her violin case resting on her lap. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. She had waited for this moment for weeks. Her song was ready, her heart was steady, and her mind was clear. She had promised herself one thing. No matter what happened, she would play with honesty. The loud boy and his group arrived soon after, all dressed in bright outfits. Their performance was scheduled before hers, and everyone was talking about it. They laughed, practiced their steps, and checked their instruments one last time. The boy tried to act relaxed, but deep down, he felt a strange pressure he couldn't explain. He had always loved performing, but today felt different. He caught a glimpse of the girl sitting quietly in her corner. She wasn't talking to anyone, just softly cleaning her violin. Something about her calmness unsettled him. It wasn't pride or arrogance, it was peace. And he realized he hadn't felt that kind of peace in a long time. The audience began to arrive. Students, parents, teachers, even local musicians who had been invited as guests. The seats filled quickly. The sound of chatter grew until the principal walked onto the stage to welcome everyone. He spoke warmly about how this event celebrated not just talent, but also the spirit of expression. Then one by one the performances began. The early acts went smoothly. There were dance performances, small bands, and solo singers. Each received polite applause. Backstage, the tension grew with every round. The boy paced back and forth while his friends joked to keep things light. The girl, meanwhile, sat with her eyes closed, gently humming the melody of her piece. Finally, it was time for the boys' group to perform. The lights dimmed and loud beats filled the auditorium. The group burst onto the stage with energy. They danced, sang, and played with all the confidence they had. The audience clapped and cheered, enjoying the performance. The boy smiled and moved to the rhythm, feeding off the energy. It felt good for a while. But as the music reached its end, he caught sight of the girl waiting in the shadows backstage. She was watching the performance quietly, her face calm and unreadable. For some reason, her silence spoke louder than the cheers around him. When the song ended, the crowd applauded loudly. He bowed with his friends, smiling, but his heart felt oddly heavy. As they left the stage, the teacher congratulated them. "Good job, everyone." "Great energy," she said. The boy nodded, trying to look proud. But when he walked past the girl, she gave him a small smile and said softly, "You did well." Her tone was genuine, not sarcastic. It surprised him. He only managed to nod back before walking away, feeling something he couldn't name. Then it was her turn. The lights dimmed again. The stage crew brought out a small stool and a single microphone. No flashing lights, no decorations, no backup team. Just her, a violin, and a soft spotlight. As she walked onto the stage, a few whispers ran through the crowd. Some students giggled quietly. The boy sitting near the side curtain frowned. He didn't like the sound of their laughter. She took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and lifted her violin. For a brief second, the room was filled with restless murmurs and low chatter. Then she drew her bow across the strings. The first note floated through the air, gentle, trembling, but beautiful. It carried something raw, something pure, Slowly, the hall began to quiet down. She played softly at first, the melody delicate like the rain outside. Her eyes were closed and her face showed peace. The notes rose and fell, weaving emotions that words could never describe. It wasn't a loud piece or a complex one, but there was truth in it, a story hidden behind every sound. The kind of story that didn't need words to be understood. People began to lean forward in their seats. Even those who had laughed before now sat still, listening. The teachers exchanged glances, moved by the feeling in her music. One of the judges wiped her eyes quietly. The boy standing backstage forgot to breathe. He had heard her practice before, but this was different. This was something alive. Her fingers danced over the strings with a quiet grace. Each note spoke of loneliness, of courage, of standing alone but not being afraid. The music built slowly, swelling with emotion until it filled the entire room. The lights glowed softly, the air felt still, and the only sound was her violin telling her story. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the song reached its final note, a single, trembling sound that lingered in the silence. For a moment, no one moved. The entire room sat frozen, hearts still caught in the echo of her music. The silence stretched until finally someone began to clap. Then another. And soon the whole auditorium erupted into applause. The sound was louder than anything that had come before. The girl opened her eyes, blinking in surprise. She had expected polite claps at best, maybe a few smiles. But what she saw was a standing crowd. Even the teachers were clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. The boy stood at the side, clapping harder than anyone else. His chest felt tight, but in a good way. She bowed deeply and left the stage, her hands still shaking slightly. Backstage, people gathered around to congratulate her. For the first time since she had joined the school, she saw genuine smiles directed at her. Not mocking, not curious, just kind. The boy waited until the crowd thinned. Then he walked up to her slowly. She turned to face him, still holding her violin. "That was amazing," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud or confident like before. It was sincere. She smiled softly. "Thank you," she said. He hesitated, looking down. "I shouldn't have made fun of you before. I was stupid." She shook her head gently. "It doesn't matter now. We all have our ways to learn things." For the first time, he saw her not as the quiet girl in the corner, but as someone strong, someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. When the showcase ended, the principal announced a few special mentions. Though there was no competition, he highlighted performances that stood out. When he mentioned her name, the audience clapped again. She blushed, looking down shyly. The boy clapped too, smiling this time not out of politeness but out of genuine respect. Later, as the students packed up and the crowd left, the rain outside had stopped. The girl walked out of the school carrying her violin, her heart light. The boy was standing near the door waiting for his friends, but when he saw her, he called out softly. "Hey," he said. She turned. "You were right." She tilted her head. "About what?" He smiled faintly. "About playing for the music. I forgot what that felt like." She smiled back, her eyes warm. "Then maybe it's time to remember." They stood there for a moment, the sound of dripping rain filling the quiet air. It wasn't the beginning of a friendship or a love story, just a moment of understanding between two people who had both changed in their own ways. As she walked away, the boy looked down at his guitar case and sighed softly. He felt different, not embarrassed, not jealous, just thoughtful. For the first time, he realized that real music didn't come from the noise of the crowd. It came from silence, from honesty, from the heart. That night, the girl returned home and placed her violin on the table. She sat by the window, watching the sky clear. The moon shone brightly, and for the first time since she arrived at the school, she felt like she truly belonged. Her music had spoken for her, and it had been enough. Meanwhile, in another home across town, the boy sat with his guitar in his lap, playing quietly in the dark. His fingers stumbled, his voice was low, but there was truth in the sound again. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Play for the music." In that quiet night, two musicians who once stood on opposite sides of the same room shared the same peace, the peace that only honest music could bring. The day of the big music showcase arrived like a wave of excitement that swept through the entire school. The hallways were decorated with posters. The stage lights had been tested a dozen times, and students were seen rushing around with their instruments, sheet music, and costumes. Everyone was talking about who would perform best this year. There was laughter, energy, and a touch of nervousness in the air. Among all the noise, she sat quietly on a wooden bench near the back of the hall, holding her music folder close to her chest. Her fingers trembled slightly as she looked around. She had practiced for weeks, often staying late in the music room when no one else was there. The melody she created had become her comfort. It was the one place where she could express everything she felt but never said out loud. The boy who had mocked her walked past with his group of friends, laughing loudly. They all wore matching jackets and seemed confident, even proud. Their act was supposed to be full of energy and humor, something that would get the audience clapping and laughing. As he passed by her, he smirked and said just loud enough for her to hear, "Try not to make everyone fall asleep, all right?" His friends chuckled, and she simply looked down at her hands. She didn't respond. Inside, she repeated the same words she'd told herself every day. Just play your music. Let it speak for you. As the evening began, the auditorium filled with parents, teachers, and students. The air buzzed with chatter and the faint sound of instruments being tuned backstage. The teacher in charge, a kind but strict woman, gave last-minute instructions and encouraged the performers to stay calm. When it was time to start, the lights dimmed and a soft hush fell over the room. The host walked onto the stage and welcomed everyone to the annual showcase. Performances began one by one. Some were solos, some were group acts. There were singers, drummers, dancers, and even a violin duo that earned loud cheers. Backstage, she watched each act carefully, clapping for everyone even though her stomach tightened with every passing minute. Her turn was near. Then came the boys' group. They walked on stage with big smiles and confidence. Their performance was loud, colorful, and filled with jokes. The audience laughed and clapped along. It wasn't perfect, some parts were offbeat, but their energy made it fun to watch. When they finished, the crowd gave them strong applause and the boy waved proudly, soaking in the attention. As they left the stage, he saw her standing near the curtains waiting for her turn. He gave her a mocking grin. "Good luck," he said, the words dripping with sarcasm. She just nodded and stepped forward when her name was announced. The lights dimmed again and a single spotlight lit the piano at the center of the stage. She walked out slowly, every step echoing in her ears. The audience looked curious, many didn't even know her name. Some whispered softly. The boy and his friend sat in the front row, still whispering jokes. She sat on the small bench, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The microphone above the piano caught the sound of her shaky exhale. For a second, she hesitated. Someone from the crowd shouted, half laughing, "Wake us up if we fall asleep." Laughter rippled through the hall. Even the boy chuckled, but she didn't look up. Her fingers pressed the first key. The first note rang through the silence, soft, almost fragile. It floated across the hall like a whisper. The laughter faded slightly. Then came the second note and the third. Slowly, her melody began to build. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had something else. Something that touched the heart quietly. Her fingers moved with grace and honesty, as if each sound carried a piece of her story. Within a minute, the room grew completely silent. Even those who had mocked her earlier stopped talking. The boy's smile faded as he watched, surprised by the calm power in her performance. Her eyes stayed closed, her whole body swaying gently with the rhythm she created. The music felt like it belonged to another world, one made of emotions too deep for words. She played a part that sounded like sorrow, then another that lifted into hope. It was as if her music was telling a story of being quiet in a world full of noise, of finding light after being overlooked. The soft notes carried the weight of her loneliness, but also her strength. People in the audience leaned forward, caught in the spell she created. When she reached the middle of her performance, her hands moved faster. The melody changed from gentle to powerful. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every sound she made filled the air with feeling, not just sadness or joy, but something honest and real. Even the teachers, who had seen hundreds of performances, felt a lump in their throats. At that moment, it didn't matter that she had been teased or ignored. On that stage, she wasn't the shy girl in the back of the class. She was someone who spoke through music louder than words ever could. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached the final few notes. The melody softened again, returning to the quiet, gentle tone it began with. And then, the last key, a single sound that lingered like a heartbeat. She let her hands fall to her lap. For a second, nothing happened. The silence was so complete that she could hear her own breath. Then slowly people began to clap. One person stood up, then another, and within seconds the entire hall erupted into applause. It was loud, genuine, and full of admiration. Some even whistled. The girl blinked, her eyes shining under the lights. She hadn't expected this. Her heart raced, not from fear anymore, but from relief. The teacher backstage had tears in her eyes. She clapped harder than anyone else. The boy sat frozen in his seat, his face unreadable. For the first time, he couldn't think of a joke. He just watched her as she bowed humbly and walked off stage. When she passed by him, she didn't look his way. She didn't need to. The music had already spoken for her. Backstage, a few other students rushed up to her, their eyes wide with admiration. "That was beautiful," one said. "How did you write that?" asked another. She smiled shyly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just played what I felt," she replied softly. She sat down on a chair near the corner, her hands still trembling slightly. The sound of applause continued even as the next performer prepared to go on. She listened to it with disbelief, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had been the quiet one, the one people overlooked or teased. But now, for the first time, she had been seen, not for how she looked or how softly she spoke, but for what she could create. Later that night, after all the performances ended, people still talked about her act. Even outside the hall, small groups whispered about how powerful her music was. Parents congratulated the teacher, saying they had never heard anything like it. The boys' group, once the center of attention, was now just a memory compared to what she had done. As she walked out of the building with her folder pressed against her chest, she felt a calm pride she had never known before. The cold evening breeze brushed against her face, but she didn't shiver. She smiled, whispering to herself, "Music doesn't need to be loud to be heard." Behind her, the boy stepped out of the hall, his laughter gone. He watched her for a moment, the sound of her melody still echoing faintly in his mind. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly moved by something pure, something that couldn't be mocked or measured. And though he didn't say a word that night, her music had already changed him in ways he didn't yet realize. The day after the music showcase felt quiet and calm, as if the world had paused to let the emotions of the night sink in. Students walked through the halls with a new energy, whispering about performances they would never forget. Some laughed about the boys' group and their colorful act, but most voices turned to the girl who had captured the hearts of everyone with her music. She arrived at school carrying her violin, just like every other day. But this morning, there was a different feeling in the air. People greeted her with smiles, and even students who had never spoken to her before nodded or said hello. Her cheeks warmed, but she smiled politely and kept walking, not seeking attention. She had never wanted to be famous or praised. She simply loved to play. The boy who had once mocked her walked down the hallway with his usual swagger. He noticed how students stopped and whispered whenever she passed. Something stirred inside him, a mix of admiration, confusion, and an unfamiliar humility. He tried to act indifferent, but he couldn't shake the memory of her performance, the way every note seemed to carry more truth than anything he had ever done. During the first period, the music teacher called the class to attention. She had something to announce. The students gathered around, curious and attentive. "I want to highlight a performer from last night's showcase," she began. Her performance showed honesty, courage, and true musical talent. "Everyone, please give her recognition." The girl felt her stomach twist. She had not expected any public acknowledgement. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at her shoes. The applause started softly, then grew louder as more students joined. Even the boy sitting in the back of the room clapped quietly, his head slightly bowed. When the class settled, the teacher smiled at her. "Your music has inspired many people, not just your peers, but even the teachers. I hope you continue to share your gift." She nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She wasn't used to praise, but she felt warmth spread through her chest. Something had shifted overnight, not in her skills, but in how people saw her. Later that day, during lunch, she found herself sitting at her usual spot, quietly unpacking her sandwich. A few students approached her, hesitant at first. "Hey," one said softly. "Your performance yesterday. It was amazing. I never thought music could feel like that." Another added, "Yeah, you really made the room feel different. It was like the whole school was listening with you." She smiled faintly, grateful but unsure what to say. Words felt small compared to what she had expressed through her violin. They stayed for a moment, chatting about music and small things, then went back to their own tables. It wasn't a sudden wave of friends, but it was a start. In the afternoon, the boy found himself wandering to the music room, pretending he had something to do. But he really just wanted to see her. She was there, playing softly, practicing new notes on her violin. Her focus was complete, her movements calm and precise. Watching her, he felt something shift inside him. He realized how much he had been distracted by attention and praise. She played for herself, and somehow, that made her stronger than anyone else in the room. He leaned against the door frame, hesitant to interrupt. When she finally noticed him, she didn't seem surprised. "Hello," she said simply. "Hi," he replied awkwardly. "I wanted to say, yesterday, your performance was really something. I didn't understand before, but now I do." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means a lot that you said that." He shifted on his feet, feeling the usual confidence slipping away, replaced by something new: honesty. "I guess I was too focused on showing off. I didn't think about what music really means," she nodded. "Music isn't about showing off. It's about feeling and sharing." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but full of understanding. For the first time, he felt like he could learn something from someone he had once tried to humiliate. Days passed, and the energy of the showcase lingered. Students continued to talk about it, but the girl remained humble, quietly practicing during free periods. She discovered new pieces to play, experimenting with small melodies she had never shared. Each note became a step forward in her journey, a way to grow and express more of herself. The boy, too, found himself spending more time in the music room. He began playing the guitar again, not to impress anyone, but simply because it made him feel alive. Occasionally, he would glance at her as she played, silently admiring her focus and calm. Sometimes she would glance back and their eyes would meet for a fleeting moment. There was no need for words. The connection was made through music and mutual respect. One afternoon, the teacher approached them both. "I'm thinking of forming a small ensemble for a special performance at the next school event," she said. "I want you both to be part of it. I believe you can create something extraordinary together." The girl felt a spark of excitement. She had never played in a group before, especially not with someone like him. "We can try," she said cautiously. The boy nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yeah, let's do it." They began practicing together after school. At first it was awkward. He played loudly and energetically while she preferred soft, flowing melodies. They stumbled through notes, sometimes clashing, sometimes laughing, but slowly they began to find a rhythm. She taught him the importance of listening, of feeling the music instead of trying to dominate it. He showed her how to add energy and life to her performance without losing honesty. Together they discovered a harmony neither had experienced before. As weeks went by, their practice sessions became a blend of laughter, music, and quiet understanding. They learned to communicate without words, anticipating each other's movements and notes. The rest of the class began to notice the change in the boy, too. He was less loud, less boastful, and more thoughtful. The transformation wasn't sudden, but it was undeniable. During one practice, the girl paused and said softly, "I think we're ready for the performance. Our music feels right now." He nodded, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't known before. It wasn't about winning applause or being seen as the best. It was about creating something beautiful together. When the day of the special event arrived, the auditorium filled with anticipation. Parents, teachers, and students gathered, curious to see what this new ensemble would bring. The stage lights glowed softly as they walked out together, their instruments ready. The boy looked at her and she nodded, giving him a reassuring smile. They were ready. The first notes floated into the air, soft and tentative at first, then growing into a melody that was both lively and deep. Their music intertwined perfectly, her flowing emotional tones complemented by his strong rhythmic sounds. The audience was captivated. They weren't just listening. They were feeling every note. The hall was filled with silence, respect, and awe. By the end of the performance, the applause was deafening. They bowed together, their hearts racing with the shared triumph of creating something real. The boy felt a sense of humility and joy he had never experienced on his own, and she felt a quiet pride in the music they had made together. It wasn't about individual talent anymore. It was about collaboration, understanding, and trust. Later that evening, as they walked home together, their instruments in hand, the boy spoke first. "I never thought I'd learn this much from someone I used to make fun of," she laughed softly. "And I never thought I'd teach someone who thought he already knew everything." They walked in comfortable silence, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. The bond between them had changed from awkward curiosity to mutual respect and friendship. Music had bridged the gap, teaching them lessons that words could never fully explain. That night, each of them practiced separately at home, carrying the memory of the day with them. She played new melodies inspired by their collaboration, and he strummed his guitar with a newfound sense of purpose. For both, music had become more than a hobby. It had become a language of understanding, a way to express truth and a bridge between hearts. The following weeks after their special performance were filled with a quiet energy that carried through the school. Everyone seemed to talk less about who was popular or who was loud, and more about the music that moved them. Even the boy who had once been boastful and jokingly mean had changed. He walked through the halls with a thoughtful air, often looking around as if seeing the world differently. He still smiled, still joked, but his laughter no longer came at the expense of others. The girl continued to play her violin every day. She wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. She played for herself, for the emotions inside her, and for the few people who really listened. Slowly, students who had ignored her before began to stop by the music room during free periods. They didn't ask to perform themselves, but to hear her play, to watch her practice, and sometimes just to sit quietly while she played. One afternoon, she noticed the boy waiting near the doorway. He carried his guitar in a worn case, and he looked more serious than usual. When she nodded for him to enter, he stepped inside, sat down on a chair opposite her, and quietly unpacked his guitar. They didn't speak at first. The room was filled with the soft sound of her bow brushing the strings. His fingers twitched nervously on the fretboard. Then, after a moment, he strummed a gentle chord. She looked up, smiled faintly, and matched the rhythm with a light, flowing melody. Without a word, they began playing together. The sound grew soft at first, then rich and full as their instruments learned each other's rhythm and tone. The music became a conversation. She led in quiet passages. He responded in louder, rhythmic moments. They adjusted to each other, learning patience, timing, and trust. Each session left them feeling lighter, more connected to the music and to each other. No one else needed to hear them for the performance to be meaningful. It was enough that they understood it between themselves. One day, the teacher approached with an idea. "There is a local festival coming up. They want to feature young talent. I think you both should perform, not as a group but as individual acts who collaborate. Your music together is remarkable." The girl hesitated. Performing outside the school brought pressure and the fear of judgment. But the boy's encouraging smile reminded her of the trust they had built. "Okay," she agreed softly. "We can do it." Over the next few weeks, they prepared tirelessly. Each day was filled with practice, discussion, and quiet encouragement. They experimented with blending their styles, adjusting volumes, and learning how to convey emotion in ways that connected not just to each other, but to anyone listening. Slowly, their confidence grew. The day of the festival arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. The outdoor stage was large, surrounded by families and children, music lovers and casual visitors. The girl felt her stomach twist with nerves. She was used to playing at school, but performing here felt different. The crowd was larger, the stage was bigger, and the energy was unpredictable. The boy stood beside her, tuning his guitar. He didn't speak much, sensing that words weren't needed. They had their own rhythm, their own understanding. When the announcer called their names, they stepped onto the stage together. She carried her violin carefully, and he held his guitar, both aware of the silent bond that had formed through weeks of practice. The first notes were soft, almost cautious, but as they continued, the music grew confident. The audience quieted, sensing the raw emotion in the sound. Her violin carried a gentle melody that spoke of hope and courage, while his guitar added depth and warmth. The combination created a feeling of peace and strength that filled the space around them. They didn't look at the crowd. Instead, they focused on each other, letting the music guide them. When the melody swelled, it seemed as if the entire audience was holding its breath. Parents leaned forward. Children watched in silence, and even seasoned musicians nodded in appreciation. The boy realized he had never felt such a deep connection to music. It wasn't about showing off or being loud. It was about honesty and feeling, about making the invisible visible. As the final notes faded into the air, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then applause erupted louder than either of them expected. People stood, cheering, whistling, clapping. Some wiped tears from their eyes. They bowed together, grateful and humbled. The girl's heart raced with a mix of joy and relief. The boy felt a deep sense of accomplishment and humility. After the performance, the festival organizers approached them with praise and offers to perform at more events. But the girl shook her head gently. "Thank you, but we play because we love it, not for recognition." The boy nodded in agreement. "Yes, that's why it's special." As they walked back from the stage, the city lights casting long shadows behind them, they spoke quietly about their music, what they had learned, and how far they had come. They laughed softly, recalling moments of frustration and mistakes that led to discovery. They both understood that music had taught them lessons beyond notes and rhythms. It had taught them patience, empathy, courage, and respect. In the days that followed, their bond grew stronger. They continued to practice, share ideas, and create music. The school noticed the change, too. Students no longer paid attention to who was loudest or most popular. Instead, they admired honesty, effort, and the courage to express oneself. The girl and the boy had become examples, not of fame or skill, but of character and authenticity. One quiet evening, the girl sat on a bench outside the school, her violin resting on her lap. She played a soft melody, one she had composed herself. The boy approached quietly, guitar in hand, and sat beside her. They played together, each note flowing naturally without effort or competition. The music was a reflection of their journey, from misunderstanding to respect, from competition to collaboration, from fear to courage. After finishing, they sat in silence, letting the night embrace them. "I never thought music could teach me so much," the boy said softly. She smiled, looking up at the stars. "It teaches everyone differently. For me, it taught patience and trust. For you, it taught humility and honesty." He nodded, understanding completely. "And together, it taught friendship." They both laughed quietly, knowing words could not capture the full depth of what they had experienced. Music had changed their lives, shaped their perspectives, and connected their hearts in a way that would remain long after the last note faded. The weeks turned into months, and the school year progressed. The girl continued to grow as a musician, confident yet humble. The boy continued to explore his talents with care and reflection. They still practiced together, sometimes quietly, sometimes playfully, always learning from each other. Their journey had begun with tension and misunderstanding, but it ended with respect, understanding, and a shared love for music that could not be silenced. The day came when they performed again, this time for a school-wide assembly. The audience had grown, but the nerves that used to haunt them were gone. They played as they had learned to play, with honesty, courage, and trust. Each note was a story, each chord a bridge. When the final sound lingered in the air, the applause was loud and unwavering. But this time they didn't seek it. They simply let the music carry them, content in knowing they had shared a piece of themselves. As they walked off the stage together, their instruments safe in their cases, they exchanged a look that said everything. They had grown, they had learned, and they had been heard. Music had given them more than applause or recognition. It had given them understanding, friendship, and a way to express the truths within themselves. That night, the girl placed her violin gently on the stand at home and smiled. The boy strummed quietly on his guitar in his room, smiling too. They both knew that no matter what came next, they had discovered something that would last a lifetime. The power of honest expression, the joy of shared creativity, and the silent language of music that could speak louder than any words.